तुभ्यं वासुदेवाय धीमहि प्रद्युम्नाय अनिरुद्धाय नमः संकर्षणाय च। ओम नमो भगवते तुभ्यं वासुदेवाय धीमहि प्रद्युम्नाय अनिरुद्धाय नमः संकर्षणाय च। The sign of chanting the transcendental glory of the Lord. Namaha, offering obeisances unto the Lord. Bhagavate, unto the personality of Godhead. Tubhyam, unto you. Vasudevaya, unto the Lord, the son of Vasudeva. Dhimahi, let us chant. Pradyumnaya, Aniruddhaya, and Sankarshanaya. All plenary expansions of Vasudeva. Namaha, respectful obeisances. Cha, and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva along with his plenary expansions Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshana. Translation with repetition. Let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva along with his plenary expansions Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshana. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to Pancharatra, Narayana is the primeval cause of all expansions of Godhead. These are Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Vasudeva and Sankarshana are on the middle left and right. Pradyumna is on the right of Sankarshana, and Aniruddha is on the left of Vasudeva. And thus the four deities are situated. They are known as the four aids de camp of Lord Sri Krishna. This is a Vedic hymn or mantra beginning with Omkara Pranava, and thus the mantra is established by the transcendental chanting process, namely Om Namo Dhimahi, etc. The purport is that any transaction, either in the field of fruitive work or in empiric philosophy, which is not ultimately aimed at transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be useless. Naradji has therefore explained the nature of unalloyed devotional service by his personal experience in the development of intimacy between the Lord and the living entity by a gradual process of progressive devotional activities. Such a progressive march of transcendental devotion for the Lord culminates in the attainment of loving service of the Lord, which is called prema, in different transcendental variegatedness called rasas, tastes. Such devotional service is also executed in mixed forms, namely mixed with fruitive work or empiric philosophical speculations. Now the question which was raised by the great rishis headed by Shaunaka regarding the confidential part of Suta's achievement through the spiritual masters is explained herein by the chanting of this hymn consisting of 33 letters. And this mantra is addressed to the four deities or the Lord with his plenary expansions. The central figure is Lord Krishna, Lord Sri Krishna, because the plenary portions are his aids de camp. The most confidential part of the instruction is that one should always chant and remember the glories of the Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his different plenary portions expanded as Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Those expansions are the original deities for all other truths, namely either Vishnu Tattva or Shakti Tattvas. Thus, NC Transcendental Bhaktivedanta Purport. Om Ajnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, as we have been seeing for many months, the discussion between Sri Narada Muni and Vyasadeva. So, here we are seeing the different instructions that are being given by Sage Narada to Vyasadeva. So it is also important to see how the progression is taking place in the last couple of verses. So in the verse 35 that we saw, Yadatra kriyate karma bhagavat paritoshanam. So starting from verse 35, the more specific aspects of Bhakti Yoga are being described. And we can see there the definition of Bhakti Yoga is given as Bhagavat Paritoshanam. So whatever work that is done in this life for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord is called Bhakti Yoga. So any work which is done for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord in this life is called as Bhakti Yoga. And then it is also mentioned there that the knowledge is a concomitant factor. It naturally comes when one does devotion to the Lord, when one does Bhakti Yoga to the Lord. As we know, Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, I give the required knowledge. So that was the definition of Bhakti Yoga, which was given in verse 35. And then moving on, in the last verse, we also saw that Grinanti Gunanam Namani. So while performing duties according to the order of Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one constantly remembers him, his names and qualities. So one constantly remembers the Lord's name and his qualities. Now here it is being said that while one is performing the duties of the Lord, then he is also able to do this. And especially it was mentioned in the purport that an expert devotee, he molds his life in such a way that in all spheres of his activities, he is still, while he's doing all spheres of his different activities, he's still remembering the Lord. And now in this verse, that aspect of how one constantly remembers or glorifies the Lord, one specific mantra that is being described in this verse. So this verse says, Om Namo Bhagavate Tubhyam Vasudevaya Dhimahi Pradyumnaya Aniruddhaya Nama Sankarshanaya Cha. So here, Dhimahi, Prabhupada translates as let us chant. So we also see this word Satyam Param Dhimahi, where it is said to meditate. Here it is said let us chant. So this is a very important principle that is Prabhupada often mentions, that if one wants to realize the spiritual knowledge, one must not only hear, but one must also chant. So Prabhupada says Shravanam and Kirtanam. So Shravanam is the beginning step, but when one does Kirtanam, that becomes, that means when one explains or one chants the glories of the Lord, then the devotional service becomes more compact, more firm. So here, the Narad Muni is saying that one must, let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva along with his plenary expansions. So, here, the plenary expansions of the Lord, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshana, and is being described. And also, Prabhupada explains further in the purport as how do we understand these different plenary expansions. So let us begin with the first point that Prabhupada mentions that, this verse begins with the word Om. And therefore, Prabhupada says, this is a Vedic hymn or mantra beginning with Omkara Pranava. And thus the mantra is established by the transcendental chanting process, namely Om, Namo, Dhimahi, etc. So the Vedic mantras begin with Om or Omkara Pranava. And therefore, Prabhupada is also mentioning here that this is a 33 lettered mantra. And it is also mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita that when the Lord was personally present in Dwapara Yuga, he was worshipped by everyone by this mantra. So as we see, according to different yugas, there are different methods of worshipping the Supreme Lord and attaining to the perfection of self-realization. And it was mentioned that this specific mantra was extensively chanted to worship the Lord in Dwapara Yuga. So that is the first point that I would like to bring to your attention. And then the very first line of the purport, Prabhupada says, according to Pancharatra, Narayana is the primeval cause of all expansions of Godhead. So one may wonder, oh, is Narayana the cause of all expansions of all the incarnations of the Lord? Or how do we understand this? So in order to explain this, there is a wonderful conversation that takes place between Lord Krishna and Brahma. So Brahma, after stealing the cowherd boys, and when he eventually recognizes that he has done a mistake and he needs to be forgiven, so he comes and approaches Lord Krishna and offers his obeisances and asks for forgiveness. And he begs for mercy, Lord Krishna's mercy, and he says that I took birth from the lotus that grew from your navel. Thus, you are both my father and my mother, and I'm your son. Parents never take seriously the offenses of their children. I therefore beg your pardon and ask your benediction. So this is how Brahma is approaching Lord Krishna, saying that I was born out of you from the navel of your lotus, from your navel, and therefore you're both my father and son. And as parents excuse their children when they commit offenses, please excuse me. So when this was said, Lord Krishna said, oh, Brahma, your father is Narayana. I am but a cowherd boy. How can you be my son? So Lord Krishna refutes the argument of Brahma by saying that I'm a simple, small, young boy. How can you say that I'm your father? How is that possible? So when this was said, Brahma replies very interestingly. So then Brahma replies this statement of Lord Krishna by saying, Brahma balena tumi kana ho Narayana, tumi Narayana shunat ahara karana. So Brahma says, are you not Narayana? You are certainly Narayana. Please listen as I state the proofs. So Brahma from here on goes to give 3 proofs to say that how Lord Krishna is Narayana, and not just Narayana, but he's actually the original Narayana. So let us look at some aspects that are described here. So in the verse 38 of 2nd chapter of Adi Lila, so this verse says that Nara Shabde Kahe Sarva Jivera Nichaya Ayana Shabdete Kahe Tahara Ashraya. So here the first reason Brahma is giving is that the word Nara refers to the aggregate of all living beings. And the word Ayana refers to the refuge of them all. So he's stating that, oh Lord Krishna, you are actually the shelter of everyone. As we see also in Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 10 topics which are mentioned. And the last one is the Ashraya or the shelter. And it is at the conclusion that is, who is the Ashraya? So it is mentioned that all the aspects of which are to be sheltered or which are created are mentioned in the beginning. And eventually, the one who is shelter of all these other 9 items that are mentioned in Bhagavatam is given. And that is mentioned in the 10th canto, that is about the glories of Lord Krishna. So similarly, here Brahma is saying that all living beings, you are the only refuge. and therefore you are actually the Narayana. And then he goes on to say, you are therefore the original Narayana. This is one reason. Please listen as I state the second. So because the Lord is the maintainer, the protector of because the Lord is the maintainer and protector of all the living entities. Here Brahma is saying that you are therefore the original Narayana. And then he goes on to give us other reasons as why Krishna is to be accepted as Narayana, the original Narayana. So in verse 42, he says that Narera ayana yate karaha palana atheva havo tumi mula Narayana. Since you protect those who are the shelters of all living beings, you are the original Narayana. So in the first case, Brahma says, because you protect, Nara means the aggregate of all living entities, and you are the shelter of all the living entities, and therefore you are the supreme or the original Narayana. In the second case, Brahma says that since you protect those who are the shelters of all living beings. So here it is mentioned that the Purusha avatars, the Mahavishnu, Garbhodaksha Vishnu, and Shirodaksha Vishnu, so they are the ones who are in some way contact with this material creation, and it is through them that this material creation takes place. Now, usually one may think that they are supreme, those forms of Narayana are the supreme, but here it is being said, no, even they are being protected by you, and therefore you are the original Narayana, Tumi Mula Narayana. So this is the second reason that Brahma gives to state that the Lord Krishna is actually the supreme Narayana. And then it is said, Narera ayana yate kara darshana taho teo hao tumi mula Narayana. So you oversee the wanderings of all living beings. For this reason also, you are the primeval Lord Narayana. So Krishna as Paramatma lives in the hearts of all living beings. And therefore, he is aware and he is knowing all the future, past, and the present. And therefore, he is being referred to as the Mula Narayana again by Brahma. So Brahma is stating and giving different reasons to state that Lord Krishna is the actual Mula Narayana. So he is again and again using this word Mula. In fact, in different verses that is described, even in between these verses, the word Mula Narayana is used to state that of all the Narayanas, the original Narayana, the primeval Narayana is actually Lord Krishna. And then it is also important to state that Brahma kahe jale jiva ye Narayana se saba tomara amsa ye satya vachana. Brahma further goes on to state that what I said is true. The same Lord Narayana who lives on the waters and in the hearts of all living beings is but a plenary portion of you. So Lord Krishna says that, oh, how can you say that I am Narayana? In fact, another definition of Lord Narayana is that one who lives in the water. And therefore, it is that Lord who is in the water, who lives in the water, is actually Narayana. But here, Brahma says, no, he is only a plenary portion of you. So even though he is also Narayana, but he is actually only a plenary portion, not the original or not the Mula Narayana. And then we can see there are different verses that are being mentioned as why Lord Krishna is accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And here in this verse, it is said that E sabara darshanade ache maya ganda Turiya Krishnera nahi mayara sambandha. So it is said that here that superficially we see that these Purushas have a relationship with Maya, but above them is the fourth dimension, is Lord Krishna, who has no contact with the material energy. So here it is being said that although the Purusha avatars, they are in contact with the material energy, but they are never affected unlike the living entities who are affected by the three modes of material nature, the Purusha avatars, they're never affected. Although they're in contact with material energy, they're never affected by the material energy. But there is another dimension of the Lord where he has no contact with the material energy. So therefore, that fourth dimension, who is the Lord Krishna, is actually the supreme Narayana, or the Mula Narayana. That's how Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami explains in Chaitanya Charitamrita to state the position of Lord Krishna. He goes on to explain various reasons and then also the various incarnations of the Lord. So one may also say that there are different incarnations of the Lord. Sometimes the question may arise that Vishnu comes first or Krishna comes first. So there are some people who think that Narayana or Vishnu is the one who came first, and then Krishna appeared as an incarnation of the Lord. So like this, people may have different ideas about who is first, who is second, and so on and so forth. So in order to dispel all these doubts, there is this beautiful verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, which is also being mentioned here in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this is also known as Paribhashya Sutra. Paribhashya Sutra means that is the essence, or that is the fundamental principle around which the entire text is revolving. So this is how Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says that this is the Paribhashya Sutra. Jiva Goswami also states the same thing, that if there is any conflict between 2 points, one should always refer back to the Paribhashya Sutra, or the most essential principle, which is a central point of the entire text. And here it is said that Ete chamsa kalaha pumsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam Indriyari Vyakulam Lokam Hridayanti Yuge Yuge. So here it is being said Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So Krishna is the Swayam Bhagavan, and all others are Ete chamsa kalaha pumsa, and all these other incarnations. So as we see in the third chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, there are different incarnations are being mentioned. And in those lists, there is also the mention of Krishna and Balarama. So one may confuse, oh, if all are incarnations, how do I understand who is supreme or who is the original? So in order to dispel that confusion, here it is being referred to as Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So it is not being said here that Narayana to Bhagavan Swayam, or some other incarnation of the Lord is Bhagavan Swayam. It is clearly mentioned here that Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. And similarly, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also gives different, quotes a few other verses from Bhagavatam to state that how Krishna is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the original personality of Godhead. And Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also quotes this verse from Brahma Samhita, where it is said that just like there is an original candle which lights another candle, although the potency of the first candle and the second candle may be equal, but because the first candle is the one which lit the second candle, therefore the first candle is to be said to be the original candle. And similarly, although there are many expansions or Vishnu Tattvas, the primeval, the Adi Purusham is Krishna, and that is being established in this chapter very nicely by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So it is important for everyone to recognize that from the Shastric perspective, we must understand who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and why he is being accepted as such. And there are different references that the Acharyas give, so as to help us understand that there is no other Supreme Personality of Godhead other than Krishna. So that is the first point to clarify, that Krishna is the actual original Narayana, and he is the Swayam Bhagavan, the original personality of Godhead, and all other incarnations are either his plenary portions or parts of his plenary portions, Amsha or Kalaha. So that is the first point, to recognize that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and from him all other incarnations emerge. Then the second point, that is the important thing which I thought to bring out from this purport, from this verse, is where Prabhupada says, the purport is that any transaction, either in the field of fruitive work or empiric philosophy, which is not ultimately aimed at transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be useless. So I'll read this again. It's a very important point. Prabhupada is saying that the purport is that any transaction, either in the field of fruitive work or empiric philosophy, which is not ultimately aimed at transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be useless. So everyone is performing different activities, and Prabhupada is classifying those activities in the field of fruitive work or empiric philosophy. So if those activities, in fact, any activity which one is performing, if it is not aimed at the transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord, so one clear aim of all the activities in life should be the transcendental realization of the Supreme Lord. If that is not present, then it is being said here that that kind of work or transaction is useless. Now, as we see this, this is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, second chapter and verse 8, where it is said, Dharma svanustitaha pumsam vishwaksena kathasu yaha notpadayat yadi ratim shramaevahi kevalam. So dharma svanustitaha. So here the word svanustitaha means to be situated in one's own occupations. So based upon one's occupation, one can be Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or even one can be having some occupations based upon one's ashrama, whether one is brahmachari, one is grihastha, one is vanaprastha or sannyasa. So based upon one's varna and ashrama, one may have different kinds of occupational duties. One may have different dharmas. But it is being said, if all those duties are not helping one to provoke attraction, vishwakshena kathasu yaha, if those activities in different orders or different ashramas, if they're not helping one to develop this taste for hearing the glories of the Lord or the messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, shrama evahi kevalam. So this verse is saying that what should be the single pointed reason why, what should be the single pointed aim of what we should do? So we all aspire to do different activities, and sometimes we say we are confused. What should be kept friend? Should we do devotional service? Should we do something else? Or what is the primary reason how we should act? So it is being clearly said here that in spite of any occupation that one is having, in any occupation one is situated, the goal is to develop this attraction for hearing the glories of the Lord. If that is not done, then it is being said all those activities which are done have no net resultant value. So they may look appearingly of some value in this temporary world that we are living, but in terms of the real spiritual value, they do not possess any value. And Prabhupada in the purport very beautifully explains why there are different aims and why there are different activities. So let us look at some reasons as why people have different aims. Why some people have one kind of aim, while some other people have some other kind of aim. So Prabhupada says it is because of the different conceptions of life that there are different activities. So basically there is a certain perspective one is carrying, and because of that certain kind of perspective of life, of what is life that one is carrying, his activities are different. And Prabhupada very clearly explains in the purport of this verse that what are the different conceptions of life people carry, and because of which they are leading different, they are performing different kind of activity, different kinds of activities. So Prabhupada says there is the first conception, the most general conception of life among people is termed as gross materialist. And gross materialist means they cannot see anything beyond the gross material body. There is nothing beyond the senses. So when people are absorbed in this conception of life that I am this body, and only thing is how do I satisfy my senses? And therefore, because the conception is of matter, the necessities that one thinks of is all material. And therefore, one is thinking only when I increase my material necessities to the maximum, when I preserve things very nicely, material things, that's when I can become happy. So people who are in this conception of life, they do all their activities aimed at increasing the bodily necessities, increasing the material necessities of life. Although they do not recognize that in spite of possessing all these things, they never become satisfied or happy. But still, not knowing what is the real conception of life, they're continuously, perpetually working, as it is said, Shrama eva hi kevalam, without getting the real benefit or the real experience of life. So this is the first conception of life that people carry. Now, Prabhupada goes on to explain that what do these people do? So the occupational duties or activities of these gross materialists are limited to concentrated and extended selfishness. It seems George Harrison has written this song, all through the day, I, me, mine. So this is the usual conception. So when there is the conception is of body, so when people interact, they always think, what is there for me? Or is there any benefit for me? If not for me, my family, my society, is there some benefit? So the entire activities are driven, wherever one is going, one is saying, how can I benefit somewhere or other to myself or to my extended selfishness? Prabhupada says that this concentrated selfishness centers around personal body. So there is, Prabhupada is further classifying this selfishness. So the concentrated selfishness means only my body. There is no even bigger conception beyond that. And Prabhupada says this is usually present in animals. They are usually concerned with their own self. And Prabhupada says, similarly, human beings can also become like that, concerned only about my own interest. There is nothing beyond my interest. And the extended selfishness means that one is looking after the extended family. Okay, I'm satisfied right now. I will become more happy if only if my other members of the family will become happy. So the idea is that the bodily necessities of mine or my family members is the primary reason why I perform different activities. So this is because of the conception that protecting the body, satisfying the body materially is the way to lead a proper life. And this is the conception which drives this kind of material activities of selfishness. Then Prabhupada goes on to explain the next category of people who have a different conception from the gross materialist. These are also materialists, but these are subtle materialists. In the sense, they hover in the mental spheres. So as we know, there is gross body, then there is mind, intelligence, and false ego, which are the subtle elements. So here, the next class of people, they are known as mental speculators, and they carry a conception in the mental spheres. And what they do, their occupational duties involve making poetry and philosophy or propagating some ism. So they're not as much attached to the body as in the previous case of gross materialist, but these people are enjoying some sort of an art, some sort of poetry, some sort of philosophy, or some sort of intellectual problem solving, and so on and so forth. So they find happiness in this mental spheres or the intellectual spheres. And they think that this is the goal of life. This is what really one should do. So sometimes when we go and meet people, we can hear from them, what is spiritual life for you? Some people say dance is spiritual life for me. When I dance, I feel spiritual. Some people say when I sing, I become spiritual. So people carry that is being in the mental state of being. So they realize that gross materialism is not all good. Maybe there is some more pleasure in the subtle realm, in the mind intelligence. And therefore, people try to do activities which revolve around these subtle or mental spheres of life. Then Prabhupada also says the aim, with the same aim of selfishness limited to the body and the mind. So although the mental speculators are slightly away from the gross materialist, but the aim of both of them is of the same nature, that is selfishness. So in the case of gross materialist, he's only concerned with the body, but in case of the mental speculator, is concerned not only about the body, but about the mind. And therefore we see people making different endeavors to how do they satisfy their mental curiosity or intellectual curiosity, or satisfy their mental and spiritual intellectual needs. And therefore they engage them in different kinds of activities which would give them this kind of happiness. But again, the point here is this is again limited to the gross, the material realm. It is not going beyond the material realm, although it is more subtler than the previous one, but still it has got the same aim of selfishness. And then Prabhupada goes on to explain the third class of people who have a different conception of life. So now this conception of life, Prabhupada says, understands, that is spiritualists, they understand that the self is beyond the gross body and subtle mind. So now, because they carry a very different conception of life, I'm not this body, gross body, not the subtle mind. So as soon as one understands that I'm something different from the gross and the subtle mind, then as Prabhupada gives this example of a bird in the cage. So as long as one is thinking that the cage is what the necessities of the cage, to paint it nicely, to clean it nicely, but not to feed the bird inside, is of no value. The bird would die eventually. So similarly, Prabhupada says that if one is only concerned with taking care of the gross and the subtle mind and not understanding the self within, then one is actually suffering. And Prabhupada says that the gross and the gross materialists and the mental speculators, not recognizing this point, they're always under anxiety. They're always under struggle for existence without ever being satisfied. But they never recognize this point. So whereas this class of men who are spiritualists, when they understand that the self is beyond this gross and subtle mind, they change the aim of their activities. They change the activities that they do. And what kind of activities they do? Those activities, or those occupational activities they take, which are meant to free the living entity from material bondage and attain complete freedom. So as soon as one recognizes that the self, which is full of freedom, this is full of Sat Chit and Ananda, which is full of bliss, full of knowledge. Why am I living an existence which is marred with this three kinds of miseries and four kinds of problems? Why should I live this? I should not be bound by these problems and these miseries. And therefore, the living entity thinks, I need to make a solution. And I will perform those activities which will get rid of me from this unwanted existence, material existence, and help me realize my true freedom, my true conception of life. And therefore, the occupational activities of a spiritualist changes. And Prabhupada further goes on to explain that complete freedom is achieved when the individual soul meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. So although one is trying in the spiritual conception of life, again, there are variegatedness. There are different levels of spiritualists. As Prabhupada also usually mentioned, there are two kinds of transcendentalists: the transcendentalists who are personalists and who are impersonalists. So here, Prabhupada gives clarity that complete freedom is achieved when the individual soul meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. So here, again, it is important to recognize that when we become spiritualists, it is important that we establish our relationship with the Supreme Lord, as it was also discussed in the previous verses. That is the goal, to work for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. If that is not done, we are not establishing our relationship with the Lord. And when we establish that relationship with the Supreme Lord, that's when the living entity can find completeness. As Prabhupada gives the example of a bolt, which is away from the machine, may not have value, but as soon as it is put in the machine in the right place, it starts to function and everything is working according to its true value. But if that is not in the machine, its value is not the same. And therefore, Prabhupada says in this that when we develop the spiritual conception of life, that I'm not this body, both gross and subtle, but I'm self, and my activities are meant to, are supposed to be aimed at getting freedom from this material existence. So as soon as one develops this conception, this perspective of life, one's activities changes. Unless this does not come in, everyone is seeking for different kinds of bodily or mental gains in different spheres of activities. So moving on from here, Prabhupada goes on to explain what are the real activities that a spiritualist must undertake. So Prabhupada goes to say that we have to engage ourselves in occupational engagements that will evoke our divine consciousness. So this is, as we also saw in the last class, as what is the goal of all different kinds of principles in devotional life. What is the most fundamental thing? To always remember Krishna and not forget him. And similarly, in other words, here it is being said that the aim of all different occupational engagements that we do is should be to evoke our divine consciousness, to evoke our consciousness to understand who am I, and also who is the Supreme Lord, and how should I act in this relationship. Only then, once real activities are actually have begun. And Prabhupada says that this real activities of evoking our divine consciousness is possible by hearing and chanting the divine activities of the Supreme Lord. And any occupational activity which does not help one to achieve attachment for hearing and chanting the transcendental message of Godhead is said herein to be simply a waste of time. So while we are doing different kinds of activities, while we are engaged in different ways, it is important to recognize that if we want to evoke our divine consciousness, here hearing and chanting the divine quality, divine activities of the Supreme Lord, hearing the holy names of the Lord is a must. If you're not moving forward in that direction to develop our taste for chanting and hearing, that means we are not making sufficient progress in spiritual life. And in fact, it is even further being said that if the activities one is performing, if it's not helping one to develop such attachment, it is simply a waste of time. So it is very important, as Chanakya Pandit says, that how even if you lose a moment of time, even if there is worth of millions of gold, we cannot buy that moment of time. So similarly, we must be careful as how we spend our time and progressively increase our activities in chanting and hearing the qualities, names, and the activities of the Lord. So this is a very important, just to summarize again what we discussed in this section, is that there are different conceptions of life we carry, and those different conceptions of activities lead us to different kinds of activities and different kinds of aims for those activities. So unless we do not develop the right perspective of life, that we can only attain by hearing from the bona fide spiritual authorities. Only by hearing from the bona fide spiritual authorities, we can actually understand what is the real activities one is supposed to perform, how one is to perform. And that is here very nicely elaborated by Naradji by his personal example. And as we will see in the next part, as how he's telling what is that most important activity one must always do. So spiritual activities, again, has to be in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is meant to satisfy his mission. That is what is Bhakti Yoga. And moving further, it is said, this is because other occupational duties, whatever ism they may belong to, cannot give liberation to the soul. The soul, which is looking for true freedom from all material miseries and struggles, can find liberation only by the mercy of Lord Hari or Lord Krishna. And therefore, one should only engage in those activities which will help one attain the spirit soul, its real occupational duty or the constitutional position. So having said that, Narad Muni very immediately after this statement says that Naradji has therefore explained the nature of unalloyed devotional service by his personal experience in the development of intimacy between the Lord and the living entity by gradual process of progressive devotional activities. So here it is being mentioned that the Narad Muni, as he is giving different instructions in the last few verses, he is giving by his own example that what should be the ultimate goal, that is unalloyed devotional service, and how it can be attained by gradual process of progressive devotional activities. So gradual process of progressive activities, progressive devotional activities. So as we see, usually all different kinds of activities can be classified as fruitive work, empirical philosophy, and unalloyed devotional service, or it can be further classified as devotional service, which is further divided into three different kinds, which is devotional service mixed with fruitive work, devotional service which is mixed with empirical philosophy, and devotional service which is unalloyed devotional service. So of all these different categories of work, Narad Muni is stating that one should take to unalloyed devotional service, and he's demonstrating that by his own personal example. And he's also has given different various progressive methods of devotional service. So where one can engage in some fruitive work, but one should connect that fruitive work. So the nature of fruitive work is that there should be some material gain for me. If there is no material gain for me, I'm not driven to act. So that is the usual conception of fruitive work. And this binds one to the material world. It gives some reaction. So usually the most people in this material world are driven by this conception to do something for my own personal benefits. That is the most common thought. It is very difficult to take out from, because they think only if I do not endeavor for fruitive work, I cannot lead a very happy life. So this is the usual conception. And one of the most common argument people would make is that if I do not work for myself, will you give me money? From where will I get money? Who will take care of me and my family, and so on and so forth? So Prabhupada says that it's not denied that one should not earn money or one should not have enough basic maintenance. But more than that is the problem. So as we also see, Kamesya Nenindriya Priti, Kamo Labo Jivata Yavata, Jivasya Tattva Jignasa, Nardo Yash Chartabhi. So as much as it is required for self-preservation, one can have. But anything more than that, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to go to movies, I want to go to some other things, that is not recommended, because in the process of doing all those things, we are losing the prime purpose of life. And therefore, to maintain the basic necessities is not denied. But hoping that I want to amass more and more in different ways and hope that this material wealth or this material some sort of comfort will actually prevent me from the miseries of life is not really true. So anyways, the point here is the propensity for enjoyment, when it is turned into the service, into the desire for serving the mission of the Lord. So there may be some propensity to protect oneself, but if one engages those fruitive results into the service of the Lord, then it becomes karma yoga. So at least one is utilizing one's resources, one's results, one's wealth in the service of the Lord, then it is becoming yoga, although it is becoming karma yoga. Similarly, one may have this tendency to inquire into various things to understand what is this, what is this, what is this, what is this. And as Chaitanya Charitamrita says, if one is really inquisitive, one is really want to understand, one should inquire about the glorious mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So like this, so if one can engage one's so-called empirical philosophy thinking, when it is connected with devotional service, then one makes progress and it becomes yoga. But beyond this, the process of devotional service is what is recommended in all the scriptures. And again, even in this devotional service, one can further add some more things. I do devotional service so that I get some fruity work. I do some devotional service so that there is some benefit for me or my family. Or someone may think, by doing this devotional service, I may get more knowledge and I will be able to speak better, or I will be recognized better in some ways. But it is being said here that there should be no other reason for doing devotional service, and that is known as unalloyed devotional service, where the only aim of devotional service is to please Krishna. Anukulya anya vilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam. So jnana karma, so freed from fruitive work and empirical philosophy. I think I have this verse. So anyavilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam anukulyana krishnanushilanam bhakti ruttama. So the first class devotional service means one, it must be devoid of all material desires, knowledge obtained by monistic philosophy, and fruitive action. The devotee must constantly serve Krishna favorably as Krishna desires. So in the highest state of unalloyed devotional service, one is only serving favorably, Krishna favorably. And how can one know what is favorable to Krishna? Only when one surrenders Ado Guru Ashrayam, only when one takes shelter of a pure devotee of the Lord, then by following their instructions, Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasado, by pleasing a pure devotee of the Lord, one can know that he is acting favorably for Krishna. And therefore, it is very important to recognize that in some way or the other, one must always have this connection of yoga, have this connection of devotional service. Even if I'm going to office, there should be the aim that this should be the Lord is the proprietor of the home. Everything should be done for the Lord. In all spheres of life, that one should bring Lord into the center. Then everything becomes spiritual. Sometimes, otherwise, people struggle in the name of this is spiritual, that is material. No, actually, if one brings the Lord into the center, then every act can become a spiritual act under the direction of the devotees. So that is very important principle to recognize that Narad Muni is suggesting not to take to any other process, but rather to take to the unalloyed devotional service of the Lord. And then it is also very interesting to note that in Nectar of Instruction, in verse 8, so it says, Tan nama rupa charitadi sukirtina nu smritiyo kramena rasana manasi niyojya. So here it is said that the essence of all the advices of all the different scriptures is one, that is 24 hours a day. One must utilize one's time in nicely chanting and remembering the Lord's divine name, transcendental form, qualities, and eternal pastimes, and thereby gradually engaging one's tongue and mind. So this is the one common instruction, that if we want to develop this unalloyed devotional service, we must increase our intensity and the quality of our devotional service. And devotional service begins with Shravanam and Kirtanam. And in this regard, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, in the purport Srila Prabhupada explains, that gives the method of different stages of devotional service. And in the neophyte stage, one should always engage in hearing Krishna Katha. This is called Shravana Dasa. Shravana Dasha. So in the beginning stages, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati recommends that one should constantly always hear the glories and the activities of the Supreme Lord. When one is doing this, one is said to be in Shravana Dasha. And then by doing this constant hearing about the transcendental holy name of Krishna and his form, transcendental form, name, qualities, one can attain to the stage of acceptance called Varana Dasha. So when one comes to this stage of Varana Dasha, he becomes attached to hearing Krishna Katha. So in the beginning, one has to force oneself to hear continuously. But once one develops this Shravana Dasha, then he begins to develop this next stage, which is Varana Dasha, where he is constantly attached to hearing Krishna Katha. When one is able to chant in ecstasy, he attains to the stage of Smarana Avastha, the stage of remembering. So after constant attachment to hearing Krishna Katha, there is the state of Smarana Avastha, where one is able to remember constantly the activities, glories, name, form of the Lord. And then it goes on further to state that after Smarana Dasha, there is Samadhi, where one has fully developed the soul to understand one's constitutional position. And at that time, one can understand one's relationship with Krishna, and that is called Sampati Dasha, or the perfection of life. So there are different stages. As we also know, there are 9 stages of devotional service. So we need to gradually progress by increasing our attachment to hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. And here in this verse, in the purport Prabhupada writes, the most confidential part of the instruction is that one should always chant and remember the glories of the Lord Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his different plenary portions, expanded as Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. So, as we see, we also worship Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu along with other Panchatattva. Here also Prabhupada is explaining that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, along with his different plenary portions, expanded as Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. So Prabhupada also uses a very specific term in this verse, in this purport, saying that saying that the four expansions as AIDS D camp. Prabhupada, so one has to look up into the dictionary to find what the meaning is. So it means that they are the confidential servants of an military official or executive. So just like there are some confidential people who are always surrounding the heads of the state or the executives or the top military officials. Similarly, Prabhupada is explaining here that Lord Krishna is in the center, and there are these four confidential associates of the Lord, that is Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. And Prabhupada is also explaining the purport as how Vasudeva and Sankarshana are on the middle left and right. Vasudeva is in the middle left and Sankarshana is on the right. And then Pradyumna is on the right of Sankarshana. Aniruddha is on the left of Vasudeva. So in this way, the four deities are along with Lord Krishna in the center is to be remembered and glorified. And this verse, this is a mantra which especially was recited in Dwapar Yuga to glorify the Lord and his four other associates. So in conclusion, it is important that we should all aim to develop the spiritual conception of life and perform the spiritual activities. And spiritual activities, as we see, we need to progressively increase our intensity and quality of our devotional service, especially remove it from the weeds and remove it from the fruitive conception and the empiric conceptions. At the same time, it is also important to engage whatever activities we are doing to bring the Lord into the center. By doing that, the real self, the soul, can find true satisfaction and get real freedom from material existence. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, we'll stop here. And please do join us for the evening Bhagavad Gita class at 7:30 p.m. and Kirtan God Aarti at 7 p.m. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki
जय
Krishna Prabhupada ki
जय
Premanande.
हरि हरि